This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wenmacher, Tim Schweitzer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Paris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's news and talk.
It is the High School Football Preview Show, week 3 of the playoffs. It is Mike Wenmacher, joined by the panel as always from Channel 1450, Derek Paris. From the Rochester Rockets games, you hear his voice, Steve Bridge, and from the SHG games, Tim Schweitzer. Gentlemen, we have 2 of the 3 teams we cover in the Woodward family of broadcasting stations still alive. So we'll go around the results of week 2 of the playoffs before we break down the big matchup between SHG and Rochester. And we'll begin with the Glenwood Titans. And it seemed like a carbon copy of last year's game, really, where the Titans kept it close for the first half against East St. Louis, but they just ran out of steam in the second half because East St. Louis just has so many different weapons. There were opportunities for the Glenwood Titans that they just couldn't capitalize. I know Coach Hay was very proud of his guys, proud of the effort. It's something about East St. Louis. There's a reason why historically in this state they are so darn good, and they showed that in that second half against the Titans. Derek, I'll go to you. A familiar foe for the Titans, too, a guy from 2 years ago who led to that Decatur MacArthur upset over Glenwood. Meissen comes back to really kind of bite the Titans in this one.
Yeah, yes, he did. And just what an incredible athlete and football player he is. He was kind of quiet in the first quarter, and then all of a sudden when he took that pitch and got to the outside, it was just like, man, that kid is on another level. And, East St. Louis and Glenwood have some very exceptional athletes on both sides of the ball. There's no doubt about that. And everybody that showed up in Chatham last week knew that, and that's why they were there for that game. But, I mean, Meissen Johnson Cook is just on another level. The way he runs, the effortlessness that it looks like, but how fast it actually is, and then you mix in the power with how big he is. We saw that a couple times at the goal line when he met somebody there. It was not a competition. You need more than one guy to stop him, and not more than one guy can catch him. So that's quite a problem. And it was kind of a carbon copy in terms of, you felt like Glenwood kept it close and had a chance in the first half. And, they take the lead on the Grady Mueller touchdown, and then Tristan Schwint kicks the extra point, and everybody in Chatham's going crazy. And you look over on the East St. Louis sideline, and they're just like, yeah, we still have two more quarters to play at least. So yeah, keep up. And that was kind of what happened was, just as Coach Hay said after the game, kind of ran out of gas. And the East St. Louis team is definitely they're worthy of being the top team in 6A.
Yeah, the Glenwood Titans, of course, the effort there. I think the big turnaround for me was inability on the Hudson McCubbin interception to put that in the end zone. I think that changes the complexity a little bit. And then to your point, Derek, next play, Meissen takes it 99 yards to the house. I mean, that's just a backbreaker right there. But a great season for the Glenwood Titans. Nothing to be ashamed about at all. They were only the 4th team ever in school history to go undefeated in the regular season. So we commend them for a great job. And those seniors, what a run they had. 2 state quarterfinals. East St. Louis brings their season to an end. So let's get to the 2 teams that did advance. And we will start with you, Steve, with the Rochester Rockets. They go to Waterloo and get a big 55-21 victory. And that quick strike ability of the Rochester Rockets shown out in the closing moments of that first half of that game, it seems.
Absolutely, Mike. And so, a tale of 2 different ways to run and operate a football team, what the Waterloo Bulldogs like to do and what the Rochester Rockets like to do. So it's 14-14, tail end of the first half. And there was about 12 minutes of possession time for the Waterloo Bulldogs after going down 14-0 to get it back to 14-14. And then in the last 90 seconds or so of the first half, the Rochester Rockets score a pair of touchdowns, and then it's just kind of over with at that point in time. Waterloo took about 12 minutes to score 2. Rochester scores 2 in 90 seconds, including a touchdown with about 4 seconds or so left in the first half after they shut the door on Waterloo, took a couple of timeouts, forced them into a 4th and out, and they punted the ball away. And they then just stuffed the Waterloo running attack on the very first drive of the third quarter. Another touchdown, 41 straight unanswered, and Rochester was off and cruising out of round 2 after a little bit of a cruise, a little bit of a road trip down to Waterloo there for the Rochester Rockets in week 2.
And talk about, we mentioned the amount of weapons this team has. All of a sudden, I'm watching the highlights. And here's a sophomore running back getting in the end zone twice that haven't really heard his name much this season. Just talk about the depths at the skill positions that this Rockets team has.
Yeah, so that's Evram Tabag, and a lot of people around Rochester have really been curious to see just what type of a football player Evram would turn into. He was a little bit banged up throughout the summer, wasn't quite 100% until maybe a month or so into the season, and again, just a sophomore. So he had his freshman year, then he missed a couple of games early. So it takes a while to really get your footing, and then most Rocket fans really saw him in the first half of the Week 9 game against SHG, a game I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about here. But Evram really got his first real kind of taste of big varsity action, I think, in that game. The Rochester fullback, otherwise, they were using in short yardage situations. Jory Myron at that point in time was a little bit banged up. And then Evram's only gotten better since that appearance. And now he certainly seems to be a real piece in this Rochester running attack. You also get Cordell Gregory back. And so there's just all Rockets are adding here in the postseason at some pretty important offensive positions when it comes to being able to move the ball. So Evram's come along greatly. There's a couple other kids who have bounced back from injury that are now really a full go here for the Rockets. So it's a different team than it was Week 9 that faced the SHG Cyclones just a couple of weeks back.
Well, before we get to those quarterfinal opponent in SHG, we've talked a lot about the offense here, and you mentioned 12 minutes of possession for Waterloo in that first half. What changed? What was the change defensively for the Rockets that got them that big lead?
Well, the Rockets kind of hurt themselves a little bit in the first half. Waterloo's got a very interesting offense, but they also do this. The offensive linemen go down to a set position on their knees, and then they go down. The Rockets had been preparing for that all week on defense in their practices, but it fooled them just enough, or there was enough little extra motion on the Waterloo offensive line to get some defensive linemen every once in a while to jump off sides. And there were encroachment penalties, a couple that extended fourth down drives for the Waterloo Bulldogs. So it was a little bit of what Waterloo was doing. It was a little bit of Rochester not being at their best in those situations that kind of even drug the game back to 14-14 there in the first half, Mike. And then once all that kind of got sorted out and the Rochester offense was just simply too potent and too quick for the Waterloo Bulldogs to slow down. And you stop a team like Waterloo, a run kind of only team, a couple of times, or you force them to pass 2 or 3 times in a series. And then you've kind of got them beat just a little bit because they can't come back from being so far down. And that was just really how the game and eventually went, especially through the second half.
So, Tim, let's get to you. The SHG Cyclones, they get a 45-14 victory over Carterville in the second round of the playoffs. And it really seems to me that this SHG team may be playing their best football of the year right now.
It's a team that's gotten better and in some cases healthier during the course of the season, Mike. And I think that's probably why you're seeing the Cyclones playing as well as they are after 2 tough losses against Glenwood and Rochester to end the regular season. Went to Quincy Notre Dame, got a lead, sat on the lead, won the game. The defense was great. About the same prescription against previously unbeaten Carterville last week. Get a lead, throw the ball around a little bit, sit on the lead with your running game in the second half, end up scoring a couple of late touchdowns to make it a 30-point win. And SHG looks forward to a rematch with Rochester in the quarterfinals. But the Cyclones defense has really been great the last 2 weeks, and I think that's one of the reasons that Sacred Heart Griffin is still playing in the third round of the playoffs after getting bounced out in the second round the last 2 years. And another factor I think you have to look at is 2 of the guys that have really stepped up on both sides of the ball in one case, and certainly controlling the offense in the other, are the 2 kids from Sacred Heart Griffin who were named to the All-State team in 4A this week. Junior quarterback Cam Brinkman is 3,020 yards passing and rushing this season. That's pretty good. And Drew Ward, despite an elbow injury and some dings during the course of the season, is just having a terrific second half of the season, and he earned his All-State honors as well. And Rochester has 2 All-Staters in 4A this year. It's very, very, very rare for a single team to have 2 All-State picks in the coaches' All-State team, and both Rochester and Sacred Heart Griffin are on that list.
Let me ask you, Tim, you mentioned Drew Ward, a guy like that fighting through those injuries, kind of setting the example. What does that do for the rest of the team when they see a guy like him who's so important out there gutting it out, playing as hard as he is with all those injuries?
Yeah, and the injuries have not been limited to Ward. They've had a dozen kids at times who have been on the sideline not playing during the course of the season. Slowly getting them back into the lineup has certainly helped during the late stages of the regular season and now into the playoffs. But you see a kid like Drew Ward, who everybody who saw the game week 9 at Cyclone Stadium thought would probably not be available for the playoffs after he hurt his elbow in that contest. Drew Ward just has put a brace on the elbow. He's gone out and played well. He's kicked well. He's been super on defense. He's made big plays on offense. Tough kid like that. And they've got another one, linebacker Joe Kepler, who's been wearing a shoulder harness all season. And he just goes out and snarls at people and knocks them on their can. And that's what SHG has really gotten inspired about. Kids who are hurt, and playing great.
All right, so let's get to it. Quarterfinals. We when the brackets first came out, I think we all pointed to it and goes, okay, this is going to happen. SHG Rochester Part 2 state quarterfinal 4A. Derek, I will give you the first crack at this. What are you expecting from this ball game? What are you looking at?
A lot of familiarity is safe to say. Edgy Tim gave me a call today to ask me a question about some IHSA stuff, and then he said, what do you guys call this game now? And I said it's the game that we just expect to see in the playoffs, because these two teams are just going to make a run, and that's just kind of what it is. They're all too familiar with each other. I talked to Derek Leonard yesterday at practice, and he was like, yeah, playing them 2 times in 3 weeks is tough, but it's just what we expect now. And they know each other so well. It's just going to be a matter of, who executes, who's more disciplined, and who's able to make those big plays, and maybe, who has the ball last.
Steve, what are you taking away? What are you looking forward to this game, I should say, and what do you take away from the first matchup, if anything?
Well, I take away maybe from the first matchup, Rochester's general ability to stop the run for SHG. They were pretty good at that, and so good that they made Cam Brinkman one-dimensionally through for more than 330 yards. So I don't know how much you want to stop the run sometimes with an all-state quarterback like Cam Brinkman, but you got an all-state defensive end, Connor Broughton, along with a whole bunch of other good defensive linemen that are going to be putting a lot of pressure on Cam Brinkman in this one. And so maybe it's just then that chess match between what Coach John Allison of SHG wants to try to do and highlight any differently with the offense this go around, and then how the defense of Rochester and defensive coordinator Steve Beaker try to counter that, right? Because these two teams know each other so well. These coaches know where each other lives at this point in time, right? They're so close. They're so ingrained. Some are former college teammates. Some used to play at SHG when they were in high school, and now they're on the coaching staff out at Rochester. The storylines and the relationships go very, very deep between these two teams. So there's kind of no surprise in anybody, Mike. But if somebody can surprise somebody with a couple of play calls, and then the players can execute it and play a pretty clean football game, that's what everybody's going to be looking for. And in things like this, it's going to come down maybe to penalties, maybe to who turns the ball over less. And as Derek said, maybe it just comes down to who has the football last.
Tim, same question to you. Is there anything that the SHG Cyclones can take away from the previous matchup with Rochester, and what are you looking forward to in this game?
Well, the Cyclones did not run the ball well the first time, so they need to run the ball better this time against the SHG. Against the Rochester defense. SHG is going to have a handful of trouble trying to do that, but they'll do their best to get it done. I think folks might not have been aware at the time, but are certainly aware now that, Cam Brinkman doesn't have the flu anymore. He played with 100-degree temperature in the flu that night against Rochester in the first matchup. He's healthy. Saw him at practice last night, and he feels real good about their prep for this week's game. So I'm thinking you're probably going to see a very similar game. I don't think the Cyclones can get out with a win if they let Caden Stout rush for 200 yards like he did the last time. And they've got to keep an eye on not only Stout, but all those other running backs now that Derek Leonard has the option of running in, sweeping around, sweeping up the middle. They just have so many plays to try to keep track of. The SHG defense is really going to have to be focused on playing their part of the field and not worrying about where the guy might be going. You just got to get there before he gets going.
You mentioned defense there, Tim, and Derek and Steve. You said, well, maybe whoever has the ball last. I'm going to throw it out to all of you and get your opinion. We talk a lot about these offenses, and rightfully so. Is there any chance this becomes a defensive battle where we see a 28-24, a 21-14? Any chance at all of that? Derek, I'll start with you.
Maybe if it rains early. But yeah, no, I mean, the first matchup was 31-28, and I think most people would consider that low scoring for these two teams. But no, I think probably the offenses are going to thrive. But I mean, defenses could score in this game. There's no question about that. And we've seen SHG get some help on special teams, so it's definitely a possibility. But I don't really see it being a low scoring game.
Steve, you?
Yeah, probably not, right? But we can be surprised by just about anything, or maybe this one goes to overtime, so there's going to be some extra scores put up there in the end. We'll have to wait and find out.
Tim, your thoughts?
Low scoring, probably not. It's supposed to be very windy during the day on Saturday, but the wind will die down once it gets dark a little bit. And so I don't think that's going to be a huge factor. And it's not going to rain. And the new turf at Rochester is nice and spongy, right, Steve? So I think these kids will be nice and spongy, jumping all over the field, running up and down the field. And it's going to be fun to watch. If fans don't have anything else to do Saturday, come out to Rochester and watch what could be a whale of a game.
Well, you know what, Tim? Last year, right? SHG at Rochester in the regular season, that game got wet and the field got really sloppy. And that old grass field that Rochester played on a year ago, as you mentioned, is gone. So everybody should have the same footing when we're going at it again on Saturday night out there.
I think it should be a lot of fun to watch. And yeah, if both teams are in the 30s, we've got the game I think everybody wants to see. So let's go.
I would agree. So let's get. I don't want to say predictions, but Tim, SHG wins if
they play the defensive game that they have put on the field in recent weeks. I mean, you saw high-scoring games at Chatham and at home against Rochester, but the defense was pretty good even in those games. And the last 2 weeks, their defense has just been great. The defense will can't turn the ball over, block and tackle, basic football, try not to give up big plays. God, that list gets longer and longer of things you've got to try to do, but that's what these two teams are all about.
The deeper you go in the playoffs, the more that list gets added to. That is for sure. Steve, Rochester wins if?
I think they need a couple of chunk plays, which the offense has been good at here lately, some explosive opportunities go down the field. And their third down conversion rate on offense has to continue to be good. It's been better over the last number of weeks. As you were saying to Tim, maybe SHG's playing some of the best football of the year. I think the same can be said for the Rochester Rockets, that over the last number of weeks, they've just really, really been, I think, improving in all aspects. And the third down conversion on the other side of things too, right? If you get SHG in a situation of, say, 3rd and 5 or 6 or even longer, that time for the Rocket defense is going to be really critical. How many times can they stop Cam Brinkman and that offense and prevent them from getting a new set of downs? And as you saw in that Week 9 matchup, Drew Ward is a weapon, and so is Andrew Walters and a lot of other kids. But can they limit anybody or just hold them back, right? You can't stop them. You can only hope to contain them. Mike, how well can the Rochester defense contain the explosive passing attack of Cam Ward and, Cam Brinkman, Drew Ward, and Andrew Walters?
Yes, and before we remind everyone how they can listen to on our Woodward family of stations, I do want to ask you, Derek, and give you compliments on a feature you guys have been doing, the Meet the Line feature on Channel 1450. Tim mentioned it, and Coach Hay even says, I'm pretty boring, but games are won and lost in the trenches, and I think it's really awesome. Tell us a bit about the Meet the Line segment you guys are doing at Channel 1450.
Yeah, we kind of made it a quarterfinal tradition now, where teams who make the quarterfinals get the opportunity to have a little fun with their offensive linemen and give them a spotlight, because as somebody posted on the South Fork video, it's like, yeah, those guys are out there doing all the work all the time, and you never hear their names called at the games. It's always the person who scored the touchdown, and so it's just a fun way to highlight those guys, because as I've learned talking to them, sometimes they're usually they're the funniest guys on the team. And also, they have to be pretty smart. So it's a good combination because they usually have some witty things to say to either their quarterbacks or running backs while we do it. But I mean, it's just a great way to highlight, the guys who, don't get a lot of the press clippings or, get talked about enough. And those guys, like you said, that's where the game's won and lost a lot of times. So it's important to give those guys some love.
Definitely. And real quickly, speaking of giving love, also Williamsville still alive. Derek, tell us a little bit about their matchup in the quarterfinal.
Yeah, speaking of familiarity with SHG and Rochester, it's kind of the same thing with Williamsville and Tolono Unity, where if you make a quarterfinal, if you're going to make a run in 3A in the South, you're probably going to run into one of these two teams, and that's just been the case the last decade or so, where these two programs are excellent. And Williamsville this year is still undefeated. They're absolutely rolling through teams, and having a guy like Matthew Miller, who's an all-state running back, just be kind of the highlight. But I mean, if you go watch their meet the line, they got some big boys up front, and that's a big reason why. And I think the X factor this year has probably been Jackson Sanders and his growth and how he's taken over that quarterback position. And he's not just a facilitator; he's a really good playmaker. And they have a lot of different options on offense, and they hit you hard on defense. So that's going to be a really fun one. 2:00 start, Tolono Unity at Williamsville on Saturday.
Yeah, a lot of fun on Saturday to be had, and we're looking forward to carrying the action of the SHG Cyclones and Rochester Rockets. And to that end, Steve, where can people listen for the Rochester Rockets and SHG Cyclones call on your end?
Yeah. Oh, and they can also meet the line. They can meet Dylan DeRocher and Wesley Sheridan and Vinny Laurent and Jake Phoebus and Luke Lyons. An honorable mention to Cade Jones, who's been out this season with an injury. But they can meet all those linemen and all the other Rockets and those players from SHG too on 97.7 FM, 970 AM, or on the WMAY app or WMAY.com to hear the broadcast with myself and Chris McLeod.
And Tim, where can people hear you calling the game between the Cyclones and the Rockets on Saturday?
At Rochester on Saturday, we'll have Chris DeLisser, Darren Pritchett in the press box on the sideline on Sports Radio 92.3 FM, 1450 AM, sportsradio1450.com, and the Sports Radio 1450 app.
And Derek, a little bit of staggered start. Are you going to try to make it to both those games, Williamsville and SHG and Rochester?
No, I won't. We have too many games going on. Four football games and an possible volleyball game. So I'll just be at Rocket Booster on Saturday.
All right, sounds good. Well, gentlemen, enjoy quarterfinal weekend. And here's the thing: while one team's season will be coming to an end, we get to do this again next week because one team from the CS8 will be advancing. One of the teams we cover here for the Woodruff family of stations. So we look forward to that. Have a great weekend. Have a great call, everyone. And we'll be back next week with another edition of the High School Football Playoff.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.